Now we're here for our panel discussion on the tillage sector, and I'm joined by Mark Brown of the IFA, Sean Foley of Maize Tech, Shay Phelan from Teagasc, and Paddy Cashman from Gold Crop. It's been a very, very difficult year for the tillage sector. It's been going on since last September, very wet winter. Winter crops weren't sown, late spring, then the drought situation. Mark, what has the impact been on yields?
Well, I suppose it has been a very difficult year on the back of four very difficult. You know, it has been sliding back, and this year is the most difficult. I suppose the winter crops were pretty good. It was the spring crops that really suffered. The drought, first the wet spring meant that we couldn't get it planted. Then when we did get it planted, there was a drought for 10 or 12 weeks, and the crops didn't establish as good. And with the drought then, the yield was back to half, back between 30 to 50% in places. And that also meant that there was very little straw on the crops, the spring barley mainly. Also the spring beans suffered big time as well. There's under a tonne or half a tonne, a lot of them did. So there's a yield deficit and a straw deficit on a tillage farm. So it's a difficult year. Yeah, one of the worst years that have been seen in years to do with yield anyway, yeah.
Shay, what is the impact of all that been on income?
I suppose to talk about income, you have to look at the price of grain, and the price of grain has risen a little bit in the last couple of months, but as Mark said, the yields are going to be back quite substantially. We provisionally put out a harvest report just as the harvest kicked off, estimating that we'll be back somewhere in the region of maybe up to 700,000 tonnes totally. So that is going to have a very negative impact on farm incomes. It is buffered a little bit by straw prices and, as I said, grain prices, but you know, you could easily be looking at another 5-10% drop in income in places, and maybe even substantially more, as Mark said, where the yields are well back.
What kind of a mental toll is that taking on tillage farmers?
Talking to our staff on the ground and advisors out there, farmers are, you know, very concerned about how to go forward or where to go forward and how to fund their business from here on in. I suppose the main message to have, and again talking to financial institutions, is not to bury your head in the sand, to go out and actually seek help and get advice. Don't try and just go it alone on yourself. Come to us in Teagasc, come to your financial advisors, go to your merchants. You know, try and restructure loans. Try and you know, smooth out the bumps a little bit if you like, and maybe look a bit further down the line in terms of restructuring loans and that, so you can get a bit of cash flow and keep the business going. You know, because if farmers just bury their head in the sand, the problem is not likely to get any better anytime soon. There's bills going to have to be paid now. Crops are going to have to be sown again, so seed is going to have to be paid for. Herbicides are going to have to be applied to crops again, so again they're going to have to be paid for. So bills are going to mount again if fellas don't, you know, if they don't kind of try and work through the situation at the moment, you know.
Are your members sharing those views, Mark?
Oh yeah, exactly as Shay says. I suppose the problem is only starting to happen now. The harvest is just done, so it'll be from here on in, and closer to the back end of the year is when you'll really see the problems. You know, that's when the money comes in. I mean, you know, we only get paid this time of the year for the grain. The area aid comes in now in another fortnight or 3 weeks. And it's after that is the problem. There won't be enough money to go around to pay everybody, and that's where the problem is. So as Shay says, there is going to be big problems facing the tillage industry for an income reason this year.
Paddy, just on the uptake of forage crops, it's been relatively low, opportunities there have been relatively low. Why do you think there's been a low uptake on it?
Well, I suppose where we see, for the forage crops, there was an investment required by the tillage farmer. I suppose, they had to be guaranteed that there was going to be a market there. It wasn't going to be prudent for anyone to go investing in something where there wasn't a market. So I suppose where we see maybe there was an uptake was where, you know, tillage farmers were doing contracting work for dairy farmers, where they had a good neighbourly or good close relationship. They seem to be quite a good uptake of forage crops. But look, I suppose where there wasn't that relationship, look, I suppose why would you go investing in a forage crop where you weren't unsure about the market? I suppose the other concern were, I suppose it isn't typically something that's been done a lot in the past. So I suppose we didn't really have good role models to show that, look, this is a good idea. Like, so I suppose the two of those things. But I suppose I suppose I say the main one is that, look, you know, typically the livestock farmers do their thing, typically the arable farmers do their thing, and I suppose it's the ones that were interacting quite closely were the ones that had a bigger uptake of forage crops.
Sean, can you talk us through the impact of the drought on your own tillage farm?
Look, I suppose we've been a fairly traditional spring barley area, similar to Mark, up until the tree crop rule was brought in. Would be a lot of traditional spring malt and barley. Wexford seemed to be worse hit than any county in Ireland. We had 3 feet of snow on Patrick's Day when a lot of the other country got those drying winds. Winter crops held up reasonably well. Winter barley was on average or above average in many cases, but it's a very, very localised problem. I know farmers as close to 7 and 8 miles away from me on heavier ground, and they've had above average and almost record harvest, so it's a very, very localised issue. Some of the later ground stood it a little bit better, but I know our spring barley were back definitely up to 50% on grain yields, and straw yields are 40% of what we're used to, you know. Now look, there is, like Mark said, there is a certain amount of compensation with the increase in price, but overall it's been a very, very difficult year from a tillage farmer's point of view.
Shay, what's your view on that? Do you think will an increase in price make up for low yields?
In some cases, yes, depending again on how low the yields were. But like Mark said earlier on, some of the yields of spring beans were less than a tonne per acre, which are going to leave bills behind them, so they're not going to actually pay for themselves. Some of the winter crops actually did quite well, and even with the increase in price, they probably are similar levels of margin to where you would have been last year. But certainly some of the spring crops, the spring barley, spring beans, spring oats, certainly are nowhere near, the prices increases are going to nowhere near cover the costs of what it costs to grow them. So they are going to be in some places in significant deficit, yeah.
And Mark, what about the malting price increased earlier this week?
Yeah.
Has that helped?
Well, everything helps, every bit helps, but yeah, I think it was badly needed. We had pointed out the whole year with the difficult year and the low yields that something had to be given to help farmers through this year, and the extra €30 on top of the price, which is bringing it up to very close to €230 a tonne. That was appreciated by farmers, and I suppose it sets a better tone for next year. It gives a bit of confidence to the market, to the malt market, and it'll help growers to look favourably at growing next year.
Paddy, just for the future of the sector, we're seeing a lot of tillage land now going into dairying. How much of a challenge is that for the sector, and what are the projections you're seeing for the future viability of the sector?
What a farmer uses his land for, I suppose, is up to the individual farmer. I suppose if a farmer thinks that dairying is the way to go, but look, I suppose we talked a lot of tillage farmers that are quite strong and quite positive about the future of a tillage industry, like, and so look, I suppose there's a demand there for malting barley, there's a demand there for animal feed, and I suppose even the provenance of our animal feed and where our animal feed is coming from, we see that as becoming probably a bigger issue rolling forward. So look, we still see that there will be a continued tillage sector in Ireland going forward.
Mark, your views on that?
Yeah, I think this year really shows up how we need a native tillage industry, even for straw alone, for the brewing, the distilling businesses, and for the livestock businesses. It shows that we need a native tillage industry in Ireland, and it's important for local native grain to be used in especially the drinks industry.
Shay, what are your views actually on that?
Yeah, look, there's no doubt the tillage sector, it has faced a difficult last couple of years, and it's probably going to do the same in the next few years. But I mean, to look on the bright side of it, I mean, it is only second in terms of National Farm Survey farm income to dairying, And while dairying had a very good couple of years, the last couple of years, there's no doubt that income is going to come back somewhere towards the tillage sector this year. So, like the lads say, a viable tillage industry is very important. There are niche markets that people need to be looking at. If it's not malting barley, it could be oats, it could be for the likes of flav or for porridge, it could be for horse feed, it could be for seed. So there are opportunities out there. People have to go and look for them. They're not going to just land on people's doors. They have to go and look for these niche markets that are out there that will give you that little extra bit of a premium over the feed prices, because feed, don't forget, is traded on the world market, so it's dictated primarily by what's grown across the world. So that's what dictates it. Whereas if you're looking at some of the premium markets that are out there, there are bonuses to be had that farmers can avail of and help to increase their income.
Sean, from a young farmer perspective, facing these kind of insurmountable challenges year on year, 4 years in a row, what kind of an impact does that have on young farmers who are attempting to make their way in the sector? And then I suppose you have the bigger incomes coming in on the likes of the dairy side. What kind of perspective does that put out there for young, aspiring young tillage farmers?
I suppose if one thing that this year has taught us is the importance of the tillage sector in Ireland for a number of point of views. For the last couple of years, the dairy industry, with the expansion and growth, they've maximised their land area on their cows in most of these farms now, so most of the extra feed required has been moved on from tillage farms, and there's a lot of trade. So I think there is a lot of opportunities for young farmers out there. From a mental point of view, look, it's been everything that could go wrong in certain locations has gone wrong this year. We've gone from a wet, very poor back end to an awful late spring with a lot of snow, and then extreme drought under Irish conditions for a lot of the summer, along with poor yields. So look at it from a mental point of view, it would take its toll on farmers, but I suppose they're a resilient bunch and they don't go into farming for an easy time. They go into it because it's what their parents and grandparents have done, and it's the love of the land that the reason to go for that choice of lifestyle. So look, it does take its toll, but farmers generally get up and they stand up stronger after things like this, and they've got through it, you know.
Mark, we're in a year now with the reform of the Common Agricultural Policy, and where member states are going to have greater autonomy to design and have greater say on what sectors are protected and how they should be protected. What kind of proposals will the IFA be campaigning for, be lobbying for in order to protect the tillage sector?
I suppose we want to protect the payments. We don't want to see any more cuts being forced on to farmers. I think it's obvious that, as Shay said, we're dealing with world market prices, so we still need the same money that we always get. We can't afford any more cuts. I see if there's any cuts in it, it will actually take the industry out. I think it's the main thing that farmers are looking at. If their payment stays there, they'll be able to stay doing tillage farming. If their payments are cut, I can see the tillage acreage dropping over the next few years. So we're asking for no more cuts. We just can't take. We took cuts the last time, especially tillage farmers, and this time we're saying we can't afford to take any cuts with the industry that we're in.
Shay, your view on that, on measures that are needed to protect the sector under the new CAP?
Yeah, look, it's difficult for us to say what measures are needed, because it's not really our role to do that. But I mean, certainly the industry needs to be supported. And I think one good measure that certainly has worked over the last couple of years is the protein scheme, and that has seen an increase in proteins grown in likes of peas or beans by over 100% over that period of time. So measures like that, where tillage farmers are supported to grow different crops, or maybe supported to grow the existing crops, certainly can help, you know.
And Paddy, it's again, the weather this year has been very extreme, and we now know that this is going to be a more recurrent situation for us. Our weather patterns are changing, climate change is certainly impacting. What long-term measures do you think are needed to support the sector?
Support the tillage sector?
Yeah.
Look, I suppose that's the single farm payment is there as a mechanism, as a support, like that. At least that amount of income is fixed. So I suppose we still see that's that's critical. That is continued. Look, I suppose, what else can you put in place? Look, I suppose we have to wait and see what comes out of the next cap as to what like I suppose there's very little being said at the moment as to what can be said. But look, I suppose maybe there's other things that are possible there again for the farmer can do within his own gate to improve his own efficiencies. So even in a poor year, I suppose at least he's getting the most of what is possible. Whether that's looking at niche markets or whether looking at his own agronomy or his own practices within the farm gate, like.
And as you said, Shay, you were saying about the drinks industry, it is booming at the moment around the world, so there definitely is potential there, and it's an area, especially in rural areas, where they're trying to really bring in that kind of tourism as well. So there's potential there for maybe land that traditionally wouldn't have been used for the tillage sector. Down the line, I'd imagine that there would be greater opportunities there.
Absolutely, and we're trying to portray, or the IFA and different groups and different bodies within Ireland are trying to portray the tillage industry as a very green, clean, non-GM type production system, and we're producing some of the best quality grains and cereals in the world. We've some of the highest yields that are out there, so we've a lot to be proud of as tillage growers in Ireland, and how we can actually sell that to other people around the world and in our own country as well, and make sure that our own customers value that and value the traceability that we can provide for whether it be the drinks industry or whether it be for the feed industry or for the food industry in general. That all has to be a bonus for the industry.
We'll leave it there. Thank you all very much for coming into us, and we'll go from our tillage panel to our tillage expert. Siobhan is over at the Maize Tech stand.